Hello, and welcome to the Your Food Matters podcast. This is Dr. Sue Kleiner, and I am here with my fellow recording artist, friend, and colleague, Erik Bustillo.
Made me sound like if I'm like about to start rapping or like beatboxing on here. I'm ready for it. Let me get a Grammy.
Let's go, let's go. So, our last episode, if you tuned in, was about muscles and all the cool stuff that muscles do for us. This time, as we led you to believe, we have episode 2 of Muscle, and it's really how to eat to get them. How to fuel yourself, your calorie, energy needs, protein, carbs, fats. What about supplements? How can you eat to reach your goals? And so I'm going to pass it off to Erik, and he's going to get us started.
Rock and roll. Thank you, Sue. Muscles, it's got to be one of my favorite things to talk about from a physical standpoint, like how to preserve them, build them, not lose them, but then also nutritional strategies to help out with that. I had pulled up some numbers because I wanted to mention a few things about sarcopenia in particular. Now, for the individuals who may not know, sarcopenia is essentially natural muscle loss through aging. But there is a fountain of youth, and that fountain of youth is going to be resistance training. And coupled with that fountain of youth is going to be like a little sprinkler that helps that fountain of youth, which is our nutrition. Because again, the most important thing for muscles is going to be resistance training, but we cannot negate the nutritional strategies. And I find this quite interesting, at least based on the statistics that I pulled up in a study. Is that there's this estimated number of individuals who experience sarcopenia, perhaps to a really detrimental point, where it's an estimated number of individuals over 60, where 30% of these individuals are in some way, shape, or form suffering from sarcopenia and the things associated with sarcopenia. And that number jumps up where it's 50% plus of individuals over the age of 80. Now, in the previous episode, we talked about muscle and what it's important for. And obviously, we know that there's so many things that we use our muscles for, from sitting upright to getting out of the toilet, to being able to carry something overhead and all those sorts of things. But then I do think it's important for us to consider, yes, there's a physical activity component, but from a nutrition standpoint, what can I do? Because something like sarcopenia it's a risk factor independent of age, socioeconomic status, obesity,
Right.
any of those things. It's an independent risk factor for certain physical disabilities. So that's, I don't know. For me, that would be something that's pretty scary. I'm like, I want to be able to do things for myself for forever. The to play with the little ones in my family, to keep on like just training because it feels good. So to jump into some of the nutritional strategies, first and foremost, I think it's important for people to hear this because a lot of times we get so caught up with working out and wanting to build muscle, but we view nutrition through this lens of fat loss. And nutrition is not only for fat loss, it helps. But we have to understand that, yes, overconsumption can be detrimental to one's health because we know that overconsumption could lead to excess body fat. Does that mean that excess body fat is automatically bad? Not necessarily from a cardiometabolic standpoint, but if we're looking at studies, we do see the increased risk. Diabetes, cholesterol, blood pressure, cancer, depression, there's all these different things. So we know the statistics. I think a lot of people have heard this before, where about 70 plus ish percent of the US is overweight according to BMI. And I think it was somewhere around 40 ish percent might fall into the obese category. Now we know BMI is not the best measurement for this. It's a weight and height calculation, but I do think it's safe to say that Perhaps most people are not over muscled. I think a lot of people are under
Right.
muscled,
Right. Right.
unfortunately. Um, so, from a nutrition standpoint, what could we possibly do to help support muscle mass? First and foremost is going to be eating enough calories, right? So if we're getting into this training routine and habit, um, yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to either lose body fat, gain muscle mass, that whole body recomposition, as it's called. Um, but we have to understand that there's so much more to it. If we're doing it only for the physique aspect, I think it might not be sustainable. We might get in our head about it because if we don't see the results we want to see, then we say, forget it. I'm not going to keep doing this.
Right. And I think,
Uh,
it's so important to understand what's your goal, what's your mission,
what's your
and
why?
yeah, and that especially as we age, right? 40 years old plus, 50 years old plus, um, if health is our goal, right? If increasing muscle, maintaining bone, if that's super important to you, then you know decreasing calories isn't going to get you to your goal. And increasing calories and adding your muscle building exercise is going to support you toward that goal. And in fact, your body will change its composition, increase muscle, decrease fat almost automatically as you start to do your progressive resistance training or your weightlifting. Continue your regular good cardiovascular workout to keep your heart and lungs healthy, and eat enough food to start to build muscle. That's the only way that you're going to get those results, and you will get recomposition. It will happen. It's not going to happen in a week or two or three. It may take you 6 months to a year to see a really good change. And then you just keep going because it's a long journey.
And you mentioned bone, and I actually shared your story. I forgot who I was talking with, but they couldn't believe it. They're like, no way. There's no way that someone went from osteopenia to essentially normal, like just healthy bones. And I was like, listen, man, it's possible, right? So it's possible.
But it
Um,
you have to do the so you know what I said. I took all the data and I did everything. Some of it, shows potential and not a lot of proof. Other things we know darn well that you can do better, right? And so you put all of those things together from the deficits where I was coming from. If I was doing all those things and developed osteopenia, well then it would be pretty hard to climb out. But I was in a deficit and I know it, and I wasn't training, right? So the it was remarkable. I didn't expect quite the change that I saw, but it is what you can do. But if I had focused on weight loss, on fat loss, it never would have happened. Yet, I certainly altered my body composition. I definitely have lost fat. I definitely have built some muscle, certainly strength and power, and 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 definitely muscle. And I've had DEXA, right? This was a pre and a pre DEXA measure going to a DEXA bone density measure and a body composition measurement a year later. And so it's good data, and it's me. It's an N of one. But what I showed myself was had that I had to eat enough. I couldn't focus on weight loss. I had to keep my eye on the ball. And I think that's the key in what we're talking about here at any age. But certainly, if you are athletic at any age and you want to continue to build, there are some really strategic things to do. And if you are not athletic and you're just starting out, there's other things to do.
Most definitely, and of course, take everything with a grain of salt, right? Everyone's story is going to be situational, but still, I thought it was a remarkable story that you shared. Um, so then, getting back to the nutritional components of it all, and you mentioned aging and all of that, 40 plus, 50 plus, and so on. Um, we got to remember that we're at risk of losing somewhere in that 8% range of our muscle mass every decade after 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50. So if our nutrition isn't on point and our training isn't on point, we're setting ourselves up for failure. Um, so as far as calories are concerned, what I'll typically recommend for individuals, and this is just, you might not have access to a metabolic cart that measures your resting metabolism, or you might not be able to afford working with a dietitian or a coach or anything like that. Just a couple of numbers is I would recommend taking your body weight in pounds and multiplying it by two numbers by 14. So let's say you weigh 100 and whatever 90 pounds, multiply that by 14, and then 190 pounds and multiply it by 16. um, and those numbers, and this is more so for an active individual who's seeking to just maintain body weight and just maybe eat enough. And again, this is just kind of like, this is not a specific science, right? So take this with a grain of salt, everybody. Um, and then there's another couple of numbers that I'll recommend where, and I like to give a range because we don't eat the same numbers, the same food every day. Um, it's the same thing, getting your weight in pounds and multiplying it times 16 again. That's going to be the lower number this case, and then multiplying it by 18. And this is for someone who's either very active, maybe even like in the athlete range, or they're actively trying to gain weight. Um, the last one is actually the lower number, is 11 and 13. If someone is looking to fuel themselves but maybe lose some body fat. So we have three things: 11 to 13, 14 to 16, 16 to 18. And again, this is just kind of like giving you an idea if you're willing to maybe track your meals, how many calories and macros you're consuming, and all of that. These numbers are a good place to start because everything is trial and error. So to make sure that we're eating enough, I think those are some numbers to get started with from a calorie standpoint.
Those are great sort of general population kinds of numbers. And um, just to sort of as a caveat, if you are someone or you work with someone who has an eating disorder or a history of eating disorder, we, number one, say, unless you have the background to work with this person and the training to work with this person, or you are this person, you should find a guide, a coach, a dietitian who is seriously educated and skillful in working with you. And typically, we strongly recommend against calorie tracking. And so, just to be really clear about that, if it can be a trigger for people with abnormal eating behaviors or eating disorders. However, for others who have very specific goals, it's really hard to reach those goals if you don't pay attention, plan, and track, just like any other kind of goals, financial goals, career goals. You set a plan and you track your progress and pay attention to your movement along that path. That's what you have to do with nutrition as well. So, a little different than Erik's numbers, just very slightly different. Our numbers for people who are already athletic. And so, you may know or not know that I'm the author of a book called The New Power Eating.
Oh yeah,
And
shameless plug.
and so it's the otherwise fifth edition of my book that was originally called Power Eating. So now there's The New Power Eating, a very creative new name. And in The New Power Eating, I actually separate needs for women and men, males and females, um, and also based on how much you train or how heavily you train. So for a female who trains maybe 3 to 4 times a week. I call that novice, but nobody's really a novice in these numbers. Oh, that's the old one.
The
Look at
fourth
fourth
edition.
edition.
I couldn't find my. I have the fifth one. I just don't remember where I have
Okay.
it. I'm like,
I
oh
will I
goodness.
will show it. There it is.
There we go.
so so um so if you are female, training 3 to 4 times a week, and that can be lifting or combined training, it I have 16 to 17 calories per pound. So right in line with Erik's numbers. If you are a female and you are um, much more muscled already, you're training 5 or more times a week. You're really a more on the professional, elite, maybe collegiate side of athletics, in your more adult body rather than a younger body. I actually have 20 to 23 calories per pound. And that really takes into consideration, and some of you are going to just be blown away when you look at what those numbers turn out to be. That means that you are getting the calories that you need to maintain a healthy menstrual cycle. Because when your menstrual cycle goes away because you are underfueled, none of your performance indicators are going to keep moving in a positive direction. You may get through a year of being underfueled, and because you're lighter and you can maximize that power to strength rate, power to weight ratio, and you actually get some benefits. But after a year, that breaks down, and female athletes very often will begin to suffer injuries and other issues because of their lack of fuel. Now, if you are a male and training 3 to 4 times a week, maybe you are early or somewhat new to lifting, and you are not highly muscled. And as I said, you're lifting 3 to 4 times a week. I have 19 calories per pound. And if you are 5 or more times a week working out and you are much more muscled, really in the physique and bodybuilder kind of category, then it's 24 calories plus per pound. I mean, the caloric needs of that moving that size body around with that much muscle, doing extended workouts day after day after day, that takes high calories both for doing the work and for recovery. So those are the recommendations on calorie needs for a more athletic population.
And if you do calculate those numbers, like Sue said, don't be taken aback too much. I think we've been almost conditioned to think like less and less calories, lower calories, because we're always thinking about weight loss, weight loss, weight loss. But we got to start thinking performance, right? Health, fitness, like just being able to function as a human being. Because we know what happens if we overconsume, but what happens if we underconsume, and the effects of just like hormones and immune system, irritability, all these things that are affected. But we could talk about that another time.
Well, and we can, examples that are out there all the time. We hear about the needs of NFL quarterbacks, right? None of them eat much less than 5,000 calories a day. I mean, that's a pretty standard 4,500, 5,000 calories a day. And they are not the biggest players on the team, right? They are not the largest, but there are many quarterbacks that are 6 feet to 6'4", right? And so when we're working with someone like that that's doing multiple workouts a day, day after day after day, they need a lot of calories, and they are in this category. There's got to be numbers for them. The other way to do this, if you look at these numbers and you go, oh my God, like there's no way I could actually even eat that much, is to start with adding 3 to 500 calories to what you're already eating. If you're not making any gains with the way you're eating, start to increase 300 to 500 calories a day and follow yourself for a week. See what happens. Another week. See what happens. If nothing's happening, add another 300 to 500 calories a day. That's also another sort of baby steps way to to do a little more trial and error, but to determine where is that spot where you start to make gains.
For sure. And it's always trial and error. I remind people of that: patients, clients, family, friends. It's always going to be this process until we figure out what's working well for us, right? Um, now that we talked about calories, where those calories come from, and I'm going to just jump into some numbers really quickly to not take up too much time with it, but to give specific recommendations when it comes to macronutrients. Um, the first one is going to be protein, which we know protein is extremely important for muscle retention and muscle building. Um, Ideally, we'd be getting somewhere. What I typically recommend, and there are different opinions on this, I don't like going under 1.6 grams per kilogram. Um, or in grams per pound, we're looking at about 0.73 grams per pound of body weight. Um, that's like the lower end of the range.
Lowest, for sure.
For sure.
And for everybody at any age.
For sure. Definitely. Whether you're active or sedentary, or, I think that that's just a good number to have in mind. Now, the practitioner and coach in me also understands it can be difficult for someone to go from eating zero point 0.9 grams per kilogram to jump up to 1.6. They're like, oh my God, I just can't do that. So, of course, it's always going to depend on the person. In some cases, I might go a little bit under that to eventually bump somebody up. But 1.6 grams per kilogram or 0.73 grams per pound. And then there's not really a limit as to how much protein we like. We don't know how much protein is too much protein. I'm sure it exists, but we just don't really know that yet. So just to give people a nice range, I'll typically go 1.6 to 2.2 or 0.73 grams per pound of body weight to 1 gram per pound. So if you weigh 190, the upper range is going to be 190 grams, just to give them something to kind of work with. And I'm like, as long as you're falling anywhere in there, you're doing pretty good with that. For carbohydrate, we have to remember carbohydrate, which is usually that macronutrient that people say, hey, I'm going to do less of this because I want to lose weight. And again, we can't look at everything through fat loss or weight loss. So for carbs, typically, and again, it always depends on the person. Is diabetes present? What's their schedule like? And so on and so forth. What kind of diabetes? All of that. But I typically don't go any lower than 3 grams per kilogram for somebody. And again, this always depends because in some cases I can go lower, but anywhere in like the 3 to 4.5 grams per kilogram, again, generally speaking. For my athletes, I go 3 to 6. But then, of course, it depends. If you're doing Tour de France, we might be looking at 10 grams per kilogram.
Right.
That's another story. But we don't want to cut ourselves short on those carbs, and especially for the points that you were making, Sue, about just being able to get enough calories in. Carbs are very helpful, and by default, they are protein / muscle sparing. So by making sure we're getting enough carbs, we're supporting the protein to make sure it's doing everything that it can do for our muscles
Right.
and all the other things that protein should be doing, which we talked about in episodes 1, 2, and 3 of the protein stuff.
Right. And so the only kind of, when you said we don't know of a real limiting factor in a healthy individual for protein, the only thing that really ends up limiting protein is our need for carbohydrate and fat. And so if you eat so much protein that there's not enough calorie or energy space left to eat the carbs and fat that you need, well, then you're overdoing your protein. And so that's kind of the way we start to balance things out. We know how much protein you need. We put that in. Then we figure out, well, how much carb, what's your burn rate? Depending on the exercise that you're doing, how much carb should you need? We figure that in, and kind of everything left over is fat. But we also have some numbers, and Erik, I'll toss it back to you, some numbers about fats that you do need, that we want fat. It's important to have it in the diet, and we don't want it too limited. And so finding the balance in the equation between your protein, carb, and fat so that you get in a nutritionally balanced, healthy diet, as well as a palatable diet, so, and that you can eat the foods that you want to eat. That's kind of what helps adjust these formulas.
For sure, just so many factors that kind of go into it. And with fat in particular, we know fat is it's important for hormone production and maintenance of hormones like testosterone and estrogen and whatnot. Um, so typically, just giving like a general percentage number, however many calories someone should be eating for to fuel their life and activity and all that. Um, we don't typically want to go under 20% unless there's a very specific case, some kind of like medical condition or something along those lines. But going under 20%, we've seen that that can start having an impact, a negative impact on something like testosterone, let's just say. Oftentimes, the 20 to 35% range works well for people, but of course, it's situational. A buddy of mine, I helped with his nutrition, who unfortunately has suffered from like a few seizures, so we went like the keto route for him, and it's been working great. He's doing well. He feels good. He's able to stick to it. But most people are not going to go on something that is 70%
Right.
fat. Nor is it recommended for athletes and all of that. But of course, it depends on the person. So that 20 to 35% is typically where I'll recommend for people to be in as far as their fat macros are concerned.
And we don't talk about percentages too much otherwise because, first of all, we've got these numbers that can really help you individualize, customize much better than that. And it will help you find maybe your energy needs in that way as well. So why work with these very round percentage numbers that actually fall apart after about 2,000 calories a day as well? The percentages are not true to higher calorie intakes. And so much better to go with these grams per kilogram, or, for us in the United States, grams per pound.
The only
Um,
ones.
yeah, we stand alone. Um, and so if you're wondering why are we giving you these sort of sciency numbers versus round number percentages, this is why, because the round number percentages are extremely inaccurate. For customization, they are more sort of, if you're talking in public health population numbers, maybe they're good, but they're also very wide ranges. This way you can figure out your very specific needs much closer.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. Um, so those were the main points that I wanted to make about just the nutritional strategies, um, and just as a more of like a psychological note, I think it's important for people to hear this, where all of those calories are not always going to come from fruits, vegetables, and like the leanest sources of protein. Like rice is very involved in my diet, but there's this association that something like rice is bad. Like sometimes you're gonna have the sweets or whatever it might be, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's not like those things are bad either. Fuel comes first. Of course, we want to make sure that we're getting it the best quality as often as possible. But sometimes just getting enough calories in, like I'll have a confession for people to hear, is like I oftentimes I go towards cereal. For me, cereal is such a good go to, and cereal has been like it's so bad for people. And it's like not really. It depends on the person, their goals, and their needs. But I'll oftentimes when I go to Costco, and everything is bigger in Costco, I'll buy cereal in Costco, and it might be either cinnamon toast crunch or
Woohoo!
or honey bunches of oats. And I like both of those. I like how they taste. I have it with cow's milk. Sometimes I'll have a couple of bowls at a time because I it's at the forefront of my brain where I'm like, I got to make sure I'm eating enough. So it's okay
Right.
to eat things outside of just vegetables and fruits and like chicken breasts, you know?
Oh, super important. Not to mention that it is hard to get in all the protein that you need very often from whole foods. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why protein supplements are so big. And it's a big part of my day for sure. In
Same here.
order to get in I am on that 2 grams per kilogram or 2 grams per pound. Uh, it really is important for me. If I'm going to build bone, I need enough protein. My goal is taking care of my bones. And and there's got to be enough protein, and I've got to have enough calories. And we'll talk about creatine in a minute and other, sort of moving on to the supplement side. But my breakfast, I am a cereal eater as well, and I am partial to whole grains, and you know that, and I do like them the least processed, but these are also processed. They're puffed. Kamut is a type of wheat, Kamut. You can, and it's just plain old instead of puffed rice. I like puffed Kamut because it doesn't get soggy in milk. It stays
Mm.
crunchy. And so, my secrets, I order it by the case on Amazon, literally. And I get like 10 bags or 12 bags at a time.
Nice.
And so, I have a cup of that. I always have, we've talked about me and my ground flax meal. I have 2.5 tablespoons of flax meal because those omegas are really important, but mostly because of the prebiotic that you get from um, uh, a flax, and then fruit on top. And if it's berry season, I'm in berries. And if it's peach or nectarine season or bananas, or it may be I'm on the road and I'm taking raisins with me, and that's what I have. But then I take a cup of milk and I put it in a shaker bottle, and I add my protein powder and my creatine, and I shake it up and I pour it over my cereal. And so
Nice.
I get a real bang for my buck in my breakfast. It's convenient, it's easy. I get a really good dose of protein. I get a good dose of carbs. I've got good fats in there. And then, of course, I have my coffee with half and half. So, I am a cow's milk drinker. I've never had any problem with lactose. I have a whole family of people at all ages, no one who is lactose intolerant. Uh, my dad at 90 was drinking cow's milk. But I, if some later in the day, if I find that I'm low protein again for some reason, maybe I'm on the road or something, that's when I will use a plant protein because I have so much dairy nutrition in the morning because I use a whey protein as well. If I really want variety, then I may look at a plant based protein supplement later in the day. I don't typically have an additional powder, but sometimes I do to get in my protein.
Nice. Yeah, those are all awesome strategies. I think lots of folks are going to have some good takeaways from that as far as what to do.
People always say, well, what do you do? Right? Well, now you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what Dr. Sue does. So now I think that to just briefly talk on some of the supplements to help support muscle mass. I think the most common one is protein supplements,
Sure.
uh, which again we have to. I think that it's always important to incorporate them in some way, shape, or form because it's hard. If there's any negative about eating a high protein diet, it's going to be consuming enough protein without supplementing. Eating enough chicken breast, beef, drinking the milk and the yogurt and all those sorts of things, eggs,
Fish.
fish, yeah, even beans, lentils. It's hard to consume all of that in the amounts that would be optimal. So a protein supplement, but I think oftentimes this is forgotten is a carbohydrate supplement. So something
Right.
like Vitargo that you can use intra workout afterwards before just to help support and fuel the performance, but also ensure that we're getting enough carbs so that the protein can do what it's supposed to do.
Right. Right. Oh, that's a great tip. That's a pro tip.
Yeah, pro tip. Um, and then I think the next one, and I'll kind of let you take this one, is creatine. Right, creatine is huge and it's so good.
And so, how much should you take is a big question. I mean, undeniably, for something like 80% of the population, I think, are responders to creatine, maybe higher. And within certain subsets of the population, if you are a low meat eater or a non-meat eater, a vegetarian or vegan, your creatine levels are low, and supplementing with creatine has been shown to enhance the ability to build muscle strength and power. And so if you can do it two different ways, you can load taking 20 grams a day for 5 days. You take 5 grams 4 times a day. Creatine monohydrate is all you need. It is cheap as dirt. You don't need any fancy form of creatine, but I will put a plug in to the company that's done a lot of the research, that is third-party lab tested, that really does um, make sure that they, as I said, they put their money where their research is, and that is the company that makes it's Altchem, and they make the brand of creatine called Crea Pure, and that is what I look for when I get creatine. It is manufactured in Germany, and it is a very high quality product. That said, loading is called, 4 times a day of 5 gram dose for 5 days. And now you have reached your threshold levels of creatine, and you can then take 3 to 5 grams a day and you will maintain. Or you can stop taking it and you will probably maintain your levels for about 28 days, and then you can load again if you want. The other strategy is taking 3 to 5 grams a day for 28 to 30 days, and you will reach your threshold levels, and you can then maintain at that amount. Typically, we say 5 grams a day, but if you're smaller, can be a little less. So 3 to 5 grams. If you're taking creatine for reasons other than muscle, if you're reading about the benefits of creatine for bone health, for brain health, memory, etc., then the research is showing that we need significantly more. It takes more to get across the blood-brain barrier. It seems to take more to support bone health. I myself, I take 7 grams a day. That's really like a scoop and a half. I do have a little gram scale, of course, because some of you know I'm a pretty avid bread baker, and you use a gram scale when you do that. So I happen to have one handy, and I measured it out. I really probably, to get even better results, maybe I should be using 10 grams. But, I've sort of found that 7 grams worked, and I'm sticking with that for right now. We have much more data in males than females, just to be very clear. But with muscle growth, we have seen benefits in women. The interesting thing is, though, as we understand more and more about how to do research on especially women during their reproductive years, we haven't done much research based on menstrual cycles. And does it matter if you're in your follicular phase, meaning just after you've had your period for about 10 days, and then you ovulate and you go into your luteal phase? Your hormone levels are quite different during those weeks. And does creatine work differently? And so shout out to Abby Smith Ryan and her team at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and others who are starting to use this newly recognized, over the past decade, methodology of studying females during the menstrual cycle. And there are further research studies looking at perimenopausal and postmenopausal women, and how creatine influences those outcomes during the menstrual cycle, or, as I said, perimenopausal or postmenopausal. So life cycle studies are important. We're getting the very beginnings in drips and drabs. It is an exciting time. There are studies coming out, fairly quickly, and we, there is some interesting data regarding different responses based on what phase of the menstrual cycle you're in. So it's worth researching that, looking into that. We have no firm answers today, but if someone or yourself responds differently than someone else, it's not surprising. so so it's a little bit of trial and error on yourself as a woman using creatine based on what your goals are. But for building muscle, most women do find a benefit.
That's awesome, and it's good that we're starting to see those studies or more of them coming out. So, like you said, shout out to Abby Smith Ryan and her team and the other folks that are doing that. Um, the I was going to mention about creatine. Some folks might think, well, do I have to cycle off of it at all? And from what we've seen, you can stay on it kind of indefinitely. I've been taking it for I don't know how many years.
I've been
Um,
taking it over 30 years. So
so look at that.
look at what now you see what happens when you take it for that long.
Exactly.
But I increased when I found out about my bones, right? So I
Mhm.
increased my amount, and I think it mattered. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The last one that I'll mention as far as supplements go is going to be, and we're seeing some interesting data on this, is omega 3s. Omega 3s paired with protein. There seems to be some kind of synergistic effect there on supporting muscle maintenance and potentially even muscle building. Now, is it because of the protein or is something in particular with the omega 3s that contribute to supporting muscle mass? But I think it's worth a shot.
Oh, sure. Well, in omega threes, in many different forms, as anti-inflammatories, if you've got sort of so inflammation is really important to begin the whole process of muscle protein synthesis, right? You need that injury for your body to jump in and start to repair. And the beginning of that repair is stopping muscle protein breakdown and increasing muscle protein synthesis. But if the inflammation chugs along unchecked, if it gets out of control, well, then that impedes recovery, repair, and growth. And you keep having continued damage. And so is it the anti-inflammatory effects of omega-3s in enhancing the production of these pathways that lead to reducing inflammation? And that's, I don't know that we 100% know yet, but it
Mm-hmm.
certainly is theoretically an important piece.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and those were kind of like the main ones that I wanted to talk about. Not sure if anything else comes to mind for you, Sue.
Well, just that um, letting yourself go to eat more
Mm.
is so joyous.
Yes,
and and
agreed.
and everyone should experience that if you haven't, and starting to lift with a goal of building muscle so that you stay healthy for a lifetime. Or if you have specific goals for your gains, athletic goals, performance goals, all of that. I know for myself, I go into the gym when I lift, and every time is a personal record, right? A personal best. You know, it just doesn't take much for me to move up. I started it so low. I encourage people to not be afraid of progressive resistance training or weightlifting. I am doing powerlifting. I love it. The difference is with powerlifting that I'm not throwing things over my head. I'm not throwing weight around like if you were doing what we call Olympic weightlifting. That could just be weightlifting. It doesn't have to say Olympic, but it traditionally does. Um, and I find at my age, having stopped lifting for a decade and then getting back to it, I didn't want to go that route. I wanted to really focus just on my strength and power. And that works really well with powerlifting. Find a good coach, a
Mm-hmm.
coach that understands you and your body, maybe your fears or your excitement, whatever it all may be. And if the first coach you work with isn't satisfying, then try someone new. There are lots of coaches out there, lots of wonderful coaches. Don't be afraid to play the field.
For sure. No, that's excellent advice. Coaches are so helpful. Even coaches need coaches. So yeah, it's excellent advice for sure. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, we've rambled on. I think we have really covered a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
we do want you to understand how to put your food to work for you, and this is really one of those times where you will notice the changes in putting your food to work for you. If you've enjoyed our podcast, please share us with your friends. We are on all the different podcast platforms, as well as if you want to watch us as well as listen to us on YouTube on the Move Nutrition Network channel. This has been the Your Food Matters podcast for Erik and myself. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
See you guys.